Hey, before we get started with the show, we want to let you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is sponsored by Audible.com.
That's right. They have more than 180,000 audiobooks and spoken word audio products. They're the leading audiobook publishers, and you can choose such comics-related titles as Sean Howe's Marvel Comics, The Untold Story, and David Haydew's The 10-Cent Plague.
Get a free audiobook of your choice at www.audibletrial.com/comicsalternative. That's audibletrial.com/comicsalternative and get started today. This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, a conversation with Rick Geary.
Countdown for blast off. X minus 5, 4, 3, 2, X minus 1, fire.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
That's right. And on this interview episode, we have the fortune of having back on the show Rick Geary. He was on a couple of years ago talking with me and Andy Kunka about, at the time, his recent publication, Treasury of Victorian Murders Compendium, Volume 1. But now Rick has a brand new book out, and it's very different from the kind of murder mysteries he has been coming out with. This one is Louise Brooks, Detective, published by NBM, and we have a really good time talking with him about Louise Brooks and then other things as well.
Yeah, and you know, Derek, the last time you guys had Geary on the show, I really enjoyed that interview, and I thought, man, I wish I had a chance to interview him as well, and now I do.
Now you do, and we're going to hear that in a moment, but first we want to let all of our listeners know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you'll find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off the cover price if you pre-order. All of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are at 20 to 35% off cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some incredible and unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials are at 45% off cover price. Sometimes they're at 50% off. And many times, you're going to find discounts that are much more impressive than that.
And you're going to also find some serious bundles. And when you buy in bundles, you save a lot over what you would pay if you bought individual issues. Just two of the bundles that you'll find on the DCB Service website are the Vertigo bundle, the 5 newest Vertigo titles for 50% off, and the Valiant bundle, the newest 10 Valiant titles for 50% off.
All impressive, and they do that every single month. This is not just particular to June. You can go to dcbservice.com every single month and find similar discounts. But head on over right now to their website, the Discount Comic Book Service website, dcbservice.com. You should go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
Yes, do let them know.
So, Andy, this is a fun interview. You were right in saying that you wanted, after listening to our interview with Rick 2 years ago, you wanted to be in on the fun, because this one was good.
Yeah, really, just a real pleasure talking with Rick.
Yeah, we found out some interesting bits of information. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and find out what that information's all about.
Oh, yeah.
We're pleased to have back on the podcast Rick Geary. He spoke with us about 2 years ago. This is soon after the publication of Treasury of Victorian Murder Compendium Volume 1. Now Rick has a brand new book that has just come out from NBM, Louise Brooks, Detective. Rick, welcome back on the Comics Alternative.
Thank you, Derek. Glad to be here.
And let's start off, obviously, talking with you about your brand new book, which in some ways is not a departure, but in even more significant ways is a departure from your murder mystery writings.
You're right. It is and isn't a departure. I got the opportunity from my publisher at NBM to take a kind of a break from the nonfiction books I've been doing and do something of a fictional nature. And it was my idea to do a detective story. And the first thing that came to my mind was to have Louise Brooks be the detective. So it's a departure in that way, definitely. But as far as the storytelling style is concerned, it's pretty much like the other books I've done, I think. It's the same kind of marshaling of information and the same, panel structure per page and things like that. But it's very different, too. I don't know. I'll leave it up to the readers to decide.
I remember when it was solicited in previews a few months back, before I read the solicit and I looked at the title and saw that your name was there, I thought, oh, okay, so this is another one of his 20th century murder mystery books. I didn't know that Louise Brooks was involved in some kind of,
Yeah.
murder or scandal, some kind of crime. And then I read the solicit. It's like, oh, wait a minute now. This is not your murder histories as you had been doing. This is a completely different beast.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I had this idea in my mind for a while, and I never thought that Terry Nantier at NBM would even consider doing a fictional book. But it just kind of came up, and Louise Brooks has always been kind of a fascination for me because, she's just one of the great images of the 20th century, one of the great faces. And everyone, or most people, have seen her, but they don't really know who she is or what her history is. And I've kind of read up on her over the years, and I don't know if you've read this in any of the publicity, but she's a relative of mine, actually. She is my mother's second cousin, and they both came from the same area of southeastern Kansas. They never knew each other, but Louise was always kind of a notorious, member of the family. I don't know if people talked about her too much.
Well, Rick, Louise Brooks, even like you said, even people that may not know her that well, she has that iconic look, especially the hairstyle that. Yeah,
exactly.
That we immediately associate with, even if we don't know who she is, we think, oh, it's that silent film star. But I know a lot of people that are really, really into silent film, and far and away, she is their favorite silent film star.
Really? Wow, because she made very few movies relative to a lot of the other stars that were out there. But the ones that she did make, especially the ones she made in Europe, are very, highly regarded today. And she's quite a presence on screen. She started out as a dancer, so she has this grace to her. She has this, this movement and style. It's really, really quite intriguing to watch her.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, and probably so, F. Scott Fitzgerald got the inspiration for his short story Bernice Bobs Her Hair from that iconic image of Brooks.
Well, I'm wondering, because she was one of the pioneers of the bobbed hair. She and a few other stars like Colleen Moore, and that was, I remember that story of Fitzgerald, that it was kind of like this big deal for these girls who had grown up with these long tresses, to have their hair bobbed. It was a major transformation. So maybe so, yeah, she was a leader of the trend for sure.
Now, was it her being such a early American pop culture icon that brought you to this story, or was it the family connection, or all of it combined?
Well, it was all of it. I think it was definitely the connection to Kansas and the connection to my family. Plus, the only biography of Louise Brooks that's been written was written by a very good friend of mine, and named Barry Paris. The book came out in 1989, and that was another connection. So I don't know. It just was this inspirational thunderbolt when I had this detective story in my head, and I just thought, God, why not make her the center of it? It just sounds kind of outrageous at first. And to set it during this period of her life in which she was kind of down and out, really. Her Hollywood career had collapsed, and she didn't have any money or very few options left, so she came back to Kansas to kind of get her life back together. Now,
Rick, the book seems... I haven't read that biography, but I certainly would like to. But the story seems very organic. It's very, especially for someone who hasn't read that biography, it's very difficult to tell where the nonfiction stops and the fiction starts. I really like how you did that, because I was thinking through the whole time, wow, this really could have happened.
Oh, well, yeah. I tried to make it as, likely as possible, I guess. Wow, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, as is Andy, I'm unfamiliar with the biography. Was Louise Brooks a well-read individual? Because we see in the story, the book, that on her bookshelf she sets up in her old room. It includes such writers as Kafka, Freud, Dickens, Whitman, Schopenhauer. So, yeah, I mean, this is not someone who reads Harlequin romances or the equivalent at the time.
Oh, no, that was definitely one of the things about her that people remembered, that she was a voracious reader, and she was very bright, and very... people who knew her say she had an acid tongue, and she was very opinionated. And I've actually seen a couple of interviews with her were filmed in her later years. Later in life, she went to live in Rochester, New York, and worked with the Eastman Institute there, and wrote her memoirs and gave lectures, and there are a couple of filmed interviews in which she's very lively and very she has this real keen wit and real sharp observations about her days in Hollywood and in Europe. So she was definitely. In fact, I have a couple of old photos of her on the set. She's got books around her, and she's, the time between shots she just spent reading.
Well, I ask about that because her intellect and her curiosity, her reading, all of that feeds into her analytic attitude, always thinking, and that goes hand in hand with her solving the crime, becoming, as the title suggests, a detective in this story. So you didn't have to fictionalize that side of her in order to play out your detective story.
No, not really. I kind of imagined that she would have the analytic capabilities, as you say. Yeah. She wasn't just your average woman.
And she makes a great Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, she might go on to further adventures. Who knows?
That would be welcome. That would be a lot of fun.
In fact, I was even going to ask about that at some point in this interview. And, we don't do spoilers. We don't want to give anything away. I mean, this is a great mystery, first and foremost. So we're not going to do that. But the way that the book ends, she does, it begins very similar to the way that it ends. At the very beginning, she comes back home, as you mentioned, because she's kind of a down and out period. But then after everything that happens, she decides that it's time to move on. She spent enough time at home. And as she's leaving, she heads back for the city. And I guess she's on a bus. And we see her she narrates, in the meantime, my head was bursting with ideas for a mystery novel, perhaps a series of them. I saw a new life ahead, and reader, I needed one. So, I mean, come on, you're setting this up for an entirely new series, Rick.
It sounds really good. I know, but I don't know. In real life, I wanted to have a little bit more of an upbeat ending. In real life, when she left Kansas and went to New York, her life took an even worse turn. She was just struggling to make a living, and she even there's unsupported stories that she kind of turned to prostitution briefly. She was in bad shape until the mid-'60s, when she was kind of rediscovered by the film critics and film historians, and she went to live in Rochester. But up until then, she had a really sad life, and but I don't know, that just didn't sound like the right note to end the story on. So I kind of created a potential future for her as a mystery writer.
And maybe if she turns detective, given the real life down and out return to New York, instead of a Sherlock Holmes, she can be someone more like a Sam Spade.
Well, maybe, yeah, more definitely hard-boiled, that's for sure.
Rick, I really like the way that you have portrayed Brooks, especially her fierce determination, the way that you've captured that. And it's very hard for anybody to come home again after a failed venture, although I wouldn't say her career certainly was not failed, but she comes back home and she's still driven. And I love this scene that she has with her mother. And her mother at one point is saying, "You had every opportunity. You're a failure." And Brooks says, "Don't I know it?" And then she says, "What will you do with your life now? How should I know?" But when she's faced with failure, she just kind of takes it as a matter-of-fact thing that I'm driving toward the next thing, and I'm going to keep focused, I'm going to keep moving, I'm going to keep doing something. And that, I think that aspect of her is exactly what makes her a great detective.
Oh, well, terrific. Yeah, she definitely has that drive, and it kept her going even through the worst times. And yeah, as you say, her relationship with her mother was that's one definitely true aspect of it, that she and her mom were always at odds, and her mother was this kind of frustrated musician and performer. So yeah, there's that aspect is very strong in her.
And she also wants to use that relationship with her mother as grist for her art, because once she gets a home on her own in your book, she is looking for something to do with her life outside of just earning a paycheck, which, she works at a haberdashery, I guess, a department store.
Yeah.
And and then she is wanting to write and is imagining taking that conflict with her mother and transforming it through art.
Yeah, she sees it as the stuff of great drama, and it could have been probably. Actually, that was one detail about her that was in her biography, that she did have kind of unformed ideas to write a play about family conflict that would be based on her and her mother and her father too. I guess her father was more recessive. He was an older man. He was much older than his wife, and Louise's mom was never quite happy in that marriage, I don't think.
Now, Rick, at one point, Louise goes to visit a man or a playwright named Thurgood Ellis because she had written him earlier and had gotten a letter from him, I believe. And she basically just wants to get some advice about writing. Was Thurgood Ellis a real writer, or is the name changed?
No, I just kind of made him up out of whole cloth. I don't think he's based on any particular playwright, because but I don't know. He's kind of a vague reference to some of the. Someone like J.D. Salinger, who's real famous and then disappears, or I don't know who else. There were other writers around then who, just lived these mysterious lives that, and had these fans who could never find them. No, he's not anyone in particular, though, unfortunately.
I thought he was a great character, though, and without getting into the story too much, I mean, he's a pivotal character in the book.
Yes, he is.
When I read about Ellis, because I had the same question that Andy asked you. Was this a real author, but now who is so obscure and lost that it would be difficult to find? But you dug him up somehow, maybe out of a critical book or a biography. So I did, Google searches for a while, and just after failed attempts, thought, okay, he is a fictional creation. But I couldn't help but think of early American writers who used the Midwest, either their background of the Midwest as a part of their fiction or drama, or just use it as a setting. And I was thinking of Willa Cather, Sinclair Lewis, people like that who did a great job, especially during the early part of the 20th century, to capture, what was going on in that part of the country where it was still very rural, agrarian lifestyle, but at the same time there was this aspiration, it seemed, all these protagonists, for the bigger city, some, going back east, and we see that in a lot of literature of that sort.
Yes, and I wanted to make him someone who wrote plays about prairie life, some another artist that she could identify with, since she was a transplanted Kansan living in New York at the time, and he was too, someone that she had a connection with, and so she writes him a fan letter, and they have they can have a little bit of rapport with each other. That's why. So later on, when she goes to see him, she feels that they have a previous connection.
I'm like Andy as well, in that there's so much I'd like to say about this story, but I feel that I can't, because even indirectly we may be giving something away. But that gets me to one of the observations that just strikes me the times that I've read this. This has to be one of the most tightly coherent written narratives that I've read in a long time. It doesn't seem as if any part of this story is, like, let's say, fat that could be cut off. I mean, every part seems to be intricately linked in a significant way to every other part. And I have to tell you, it's one of my favorite of the year, and the year isn't quite half over.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. The 6 months or so that I usually spend doing research and reading on the nonfiction murder cases, I spent about that much time kind of arranging the plot of this one, like tightening it here and there, and I don't know. I'm very happy to hear you say what you said.
I mean, I love your historical murder mysteries, and those stories work really well also, of course, but there's something about Louise's story and how she becomes enmeshed in this mystery that you don't have in Louise Brooks' Detective the quote unquote bother of history, right? So it's not like in writing your murder mysteries, there are a variety of historical facts that you have to acknowledge, that you can't ignore, and sometimes those facts may or may not be useful to your larger narrative. But with a work of fiction, you don't have to deal with the same kind of stuff.
Exactly, yeah. I do have a bit of a freer hand, but I wanted this story to be, on one level, kind of a tribute to this, the part of the country where I grew up, Wichita, and the little town of Burden, which is where my mother was born, and her parents were both born, and I spent a lot of time there when I was a kid, and so I know it pretty intimately, and I wanted to get the look and feel of the place just right, and then the big city of Wichita, which is about 60 miles away. I kind of wanted to get that, get the look of that in the 1940s. And the Jenkins Music Store, my grandmother taught piano, and she would come into Wichita and go to the Jenkins Music to buy sheet music, and it's there are connections there.
So, in prepping for this work, you did go back to Kansas and visit these areas?
Yes, I did, for sure. Yeah. And I tried to find the different locations that appear in the story. Some of them aren't around anymore, but that Dockham Drug Building where Louise had her dance studio, that's still there. And, it's a beautifully restored old tile building.
And did she actually historically have a short-lived dance school there?
Yes, that was one of the true aspects. Yeah, she did. It didn't lasted maybe about a year.
Rick, one of the things I really like about your books, I always enjoy seeing the maps that you put in the books, and I really liked this one, especially in the front part. And there are a couple of close-up maps in there too. And again, one of the things I like about your books is the way you portray architecture, and I can tell that houses and buildings must be very important to you because of the rich detail that you have on those. Can you tell us a little bit about how architecture affects you?
Well, it just does. It's something I always notice, and I always feel the urge to get it absolutely right in these books that I do, because buildings, the places that occupy us and the places we occupy and spend our time are very important, kind of on a soulful level, I think. And in fact, on page 43, there's this house in Burden where Louise is taken to see her friend Helen, and that's based on my grandmother's house. And I always, keep photo reference around of the buildings, the styles of buildings in various parts of the country, and styles of houses, things like that. Yeah, it's important to me to get that stuff right.
Because, as Andy pointed out, you begin Louise Brooks in many ways like you begin your murder stories with maps of the territory, larger, more focused, detailed maps. And, actually, Andy bringing in your love of architecture may be a great segue into, I guess, the previous book to this one, and that is part of your treasury of 20th century murder, Madison Square Tragedy, The Murder of Stanford White, because Stanford White was a well-respected architect.
Exactly, yes. That was definitely one of the things that interested me. Well, I think it's a great story, and I've loved it forever, and I've always been on my short list to do for the murder series. And the fact that he was an architect gave me the chance to reproduce a lot of the buildings that he designed around New York, and to kind of set his style and his career in a context of what was going on architecturally at the time. Because he was more a traditionalist, and he was more into decorative Beaux-Arts style, and it was kind of and this is at a time when more modernistic architects were just starting out, like Louis Sullivan, Frank Lloyd Wright, people like that.
Well, what was it about the White murder that captured your attention?
Well, it has all the ingredients of this great soap opera. Especially Evelyn. Her career was just incredibly one of a kind for the time. She was like the first supermodel. Her face was everywhere back then, and she became the mistress of this magnetic, famous architect, and then she married this insane man, and it just had all the ingredients. I think it's just a great story.
Yeah, and I had known, or I didn't know who did it, but what's called the Gibson girl, that image, Charles Dana Gibson, that you visit early in your story, Madison Square Tragedy, and she was actually one of those, a quite famous one.
Yes, she was. In fact, yes, she was among his models, among the people that he drew, and Charles Dana Gibson and Stanford White were, in fact, really good friends, and they kind of traveled in the same circles. And, White, of course, had a weakness for the younger women, which proved to be his downfall.
Yeah.
Rick, this is the Madison Square Tragedy is one of the I guess we could say most of your books either have an unresolved. Either we don't know who the murderer was, or it hasn't been completely closed up. But we know from the beginning in Madison Square Tragedy who the killer was. Was that a different type of? How did that affect how the story was played out for you?
Well, I personally, I'm more attracted to the unsolved cases. I like the open-endedness, and I like the questions and the mysteries. But every now and then, I'm attracted to a case that in which there is no real mystery about who did it, like this one, and like there are quite a few others that I've done, like the Lincoln assassination. No mystery there, and Madeline Smith and cases like that. I'm just attracted to them because there are other aspects of the story which are either really lurid or attractive in some other way that just the characters involved make it a good story.
Now, the Madison Square Tragedy takes place at the very beginning of the 20th century, and you have other 20th century murder stories, not as many as your Victorian, though, because there's a book on Sacco and Vanzetti and also on the Lindbergh kidnapping. What other murder mysteries or intriguing murders, whether they're mysteries or otherwise, from the 20th century have been percolating? Which ones might we expect to see Rick Geary books representing?
Oh, well, actually the one I'm working on one right now, which will be out maybe next year, hopefully, the Black Dahlia case. Do you know that one?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's pretty gruesome, but it's a great mystery. It's definitely unsolved, and it takes place in 1947, which is about as recent as I want to get for any of these. That's definitely that's one I'd had in mind for a while, but it's so it is kind of gory, and I kind of hesitated to start on it because I kind of tend to back away from doing the explicit details of horrible crimes like that. But I don't know, this is just too good a story. And aside from that, what do I have? I'm kind of thinking of the one after that, doing the massacre at Taliesin, in which Frank Lloyd Wright's mistress and her children and all these other people were murdered by this madman with an axe in 1914. That's not an unsolved case either.
Rick, well, I'm very excited to hear about the Black Dahlia. I'm like, how soon can this come out? I really like that story, but it reminded me that so much of your work, even the books that deal with some really, really gruesome murders, like you said, you really don't dwell on the gore aspects of the books, and to me that makes them even more frightening. It's always what you don't see that is probably more terrifying.
Yeah, that's always been my philosophy. The indirect approach. Although I'm not, personally, I'm not squeamish. I don't mind, and I like scary movies, and I don't mind it in other people's work. But that's just my style, basically.
I wanted to ask you too. I like true crime stories a lot, and I just finished James Neff's The Wrong Man, the book on the Sam Shepard murder case. Has that case ever sparked your interest?
Well, yes, absolutely. That would be on my short list as well, because there's, he was finally exonerated, I believe. So there's still a lot of mystery surrounding that. That takes place in the 50s. I wouldn't want to get much beyond the 50s. I like to have kind of a historical distance between myself and these cases.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned that a second ago because the Blue Dahlia, you said that's about as contemporary as you'd want to get with your murder mysteries.
It is. But,
why is that, you think?
You brought up Sam Shepard. I think maybe I'd extend it as far as him, but not really beyond that. I don't know if I like to take kind of an ironic approach to some of these, and that requires a little bit, I think. There are a lot of contemporary cases I'd like to do sometime, like the John Bonet case or even O.J., but those are recent.
Well, I was wondering, is there something about, let's say, the 19th century and the first half of the 20th that, we mentioned architecture and your love of illustrating that. What about fashion, the fact that men wore hats, earlier in the century,
exactly,
the way that women dressed. Is that part of it, your decision as well?
That's always part of my enjoyment in doing these historical stories, is getting the details like that exactly right. The furniture styles and definitely the hats and ties and the women's gowns and dresses. That's all. I love all that. The 19th century, I worked really hard. There are things you have to pay attention to, like horses and harnesses. Horses were everywhere back then, and the rigging for attaching a horse to a carriage. It's so incredibly complicated, and it's really, really hard to draw. That's one of the reasons I wanted to move on to the 20th century. But no, generally, I really love all that detail work, and that's part of what makes it so much fun for me.
So you're going to try to steer clear of more contemporary murder mysteries or stories like the O.J. trial, maybe the Sharon Tate murder and all that.
Yeah, that too. Well, I don't know. As time moves along, these cases, become more part of the historical record. Maybe, maybe Manson. I don't know. That doesn't really hold a lot of interest for me, that case. But there are others. There are others. I can't think. They don't leap into my mind right away. But there are others from the 60s or 70s. Say, I don't know.
Well, even some of your earlier stories that weren't part of the, let's say, Victorian murder mystery treasury or 20th century have that mystery aspect to it. And one that I went back to reread before interviewing this time around is Blanche Goes to New York. And that's a really short narrative that seems longer than the page count, because there seemed to be a lot packed into that story. And even though it's not a murder mystery, it's definitely a mystery.
Yes. And there were 2 sequels to that. There's Blanche Goes to Hollywood and Blanche Goes to Paris that were all collected by Dark Horse. And actually, my first thought about this Kansas mystery was that it would be a Blanche mystery, but then I just got this inspiration to use Louise Brooks, and so that was that.
Huh, really? So the Louise Brooks book started out, at least in some ways, as maybe being another Blanche story.
Yeah, that's how I initially sketched out the story. That was quite a while ago, because it just kind of sat there for a while, and then until I got the opportunity to do the book, and then wow, yeah, it just seemed natural to use Louise.
Now, in Blanche Goes to New York, you start off by indicating that the story is actually from letters that you found.
Yeah, but that's not true.
So you're like the surveyor in the custom house in the Scarlet Letter. You come across these old artifacts, and then you make it your own romance.
Exactly. Yes. In fact, Blanche is based on my grandmother very loosely, because her name was Blanche, and she was a piano teacher and a musician, and when she was very young, she traveled from Kansas to New York to take music lessons, and but then the story goes on in ways that didn't really happen, but that the basis, the nub of it was my grandmother.
Huh, so she didn't encounter any weird egg worshippers?
No, unfortunately. Unless she is hiding something.
Maybe you'll find those letters.
Yeah, I wish.
Now you said that did Dark Horse collect all of the Blanche stories, or did they come out just individually?
No, actually, the first 2 came out as individual comics, and then the third one was published by this comic publisher up in Seattle. So there are 3 individual comics, but then Dark Horse published a collection of 3 of them called The Adventures of Blanche. It came out maybe 2010, something like that. Maybe earlier, I can't remember.
So it's probably still in print. I didn't know about that. That's good.
I imagine it is. Yeah, I haven't checked.
Rick, I don't know, you probably don't know, but I am a librarian working in a public library in Maryland. And a couple of years ago, we found out that somebody had mistakenly categorized your books in the children's nonfiction section. And we only found this out. We only found it out because all these 10 to 12-year-old kids came up to the information desk looking for more of your books. Do you ever hear from kids that are, or do you hear from young readers?
Well, I hear from readers, and I'm not really sure how old they are, but I know these books have made inroads into school libraries and places like that, where younger readers, like high school and middle school, I don't know if younger than that, I'm not sure, but they do get them and read them because, the graphic novel form makes it very, very accessible for younger readers or problem readers, as they're called. So I have noticed that over the years that young people do have access to them. In fact, the school library here in the little town where I live has a selection of them, and it's always nice to hear that.
I think that's where. Oh, go ahead.
That's where my reticence involving the gruesomeness of the crimes makes it a little bit more palatable for the younger people.
Yeah, I was just going to say the very same thing, that I think the lack of all the gore and all the the bloodiness probably tends to make parents a little bit less apprehensive about those, which is great because like I said, the kids really love them. The kids that we've talked to, they're crazy about them.
Now, Andy, you were saying that they were misshelved in a different section for.
Yeah, they weren't supposed to be categorized in the children's nonfiction section, but somebody had labeled them incorrectly, and they'd been there for I don't know how many, probably at least a year or two, and we didn't know it.
Oh, hey.
Well, I wouldn't have a problem with younger readers reading Rick's books. So
no, and they didn't have a problem with it.
No, no problems that I've been told of.
Yeah. Because the books I remember reading when I was in elementary school, the ones that not only I tended to check out all the time, but all my friends did as well, were things like ghost stories, unexplained phenomena. And so this would be, in the same general genre, I guess. And these would be the kind of books that I would gravitate to over and over again. And if your books, if the graphic novels had been in my library when I was a kid, man, then these would be the ones that I would read all the time.
Oh, well. Yeah, I wish, there's no such thing back when I was going to school either. Yeah. It's amazing how they've been able to kind of legitimize themselves over the past few years.
Now, Rick, I know another thing that we discussed when you were on the show a couple of years ago was some of your work in adaptation. And I think at the time I mentioned my love of your work, for instance, in the Edgar Allan Poe editions that came out through Eureka's Graphic Classics line, and you've gone on to do other adaptations outside, in addition to the Poe ones as well. Have you been doing any additional adaptation work lately?
Actually, I'm working on one now. There's this series of volumes called the Graphic Canon. Have you heard of that?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. I did an adaptation of the Book of Revelation for the very first volume, and
I'm
working on one now. They're working on a volume of the canon of crime literature. So I'm doing it. A version of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, like that. Not the whole novel, of course, but I'm adapting like this single chapter in which Raskolnikov murders the two women and makes his getaway, it's a very, very, very gruesome. Like the first few pages of it where he commits the murder, and then the next few pages are kind of this little Hitchcockian passage where he's hiding behind the door and these people are outside knocking on it and shaking the lever to get in, and he barely makes his escape by a hair's breadth. It's really suspenseful. So I'm attempting that right now.
Huh. Now who is the editor of the Graphic Canon series? I can't remember his name.
His name's Russ Kick.
Okay, yes.
K, and it's published by Seven Stories Press. And they also did a children's literature volume that I did, a 3-page adaptation. Well, it's not really an adaptation. It's The Owl and the Pussycat, which is like reproduced in its entirety. But I just did a little illustrated version of that.
Now, I do some of my scholarship in comics and adaptation, and one of the things I've noticed between, let's say, the Graphic Classics that Tom Pomplin oversees, and then Russ Kick's Graphic Canon, they seem to be two different beasts in many ways. The Graphic Canon seems more of kind of a mishmash variety of different adaptations. Sometimes it's not so much a comic as just a one-page illustration that is based in some way on an original text of some sort, whereas Tom almost exclusively, not entirely, I guess, tends to take shorter works of fiction or even poems, and and there's more than let's say 1 or 2 pieces of art that go into it. Sometimes you'll find, let's say, a poem with just a 1-page image and that's it. But for the most part, it's very different. In working with Tom and Russ, do you notice different kinds of needs and aesthetics for both of those between those two projects?
Well, no. Whenever I adapt a piece of fiction or a piece of literature, I try to stay as loyal and to the source material as I can, and that's definitely what I do for Tom and for the graphic canon, even though the graphic canon stories, it is more of a free-form approach where he lets the artist kind of take any avenue that they want, and it doesn't even have to be that close to the source material. But my definite preference is to respect, what the source is, and so I usually. My approach is pretty much the same for both of those.
Now, in addition to those, I know you've also did an adaptation of The Invisible Man in graphic novel length form for paper cuts. Right. Do you have a favorite adaptation that you've done over the years?
That's hard to say. I enjoy doing them. I don't know. I look back on these, and I see. Whenever I see my work in print, all I can see is what I could have done differently or better, and I look back and I don't really see what I would call a favorite, but I enjoy the process more than anything, and I think The Invisible Man came off pretty well, actually, looking back on it.
Didn't you tell me a couple of years ago that that's one of the reasons why you did a different version of The Telltale Heart, that you weren't entirely pleased with your first version for Tom, and then you went back and made some minor changes? It was mostly because I thought that my style had evolved, my visual, my pen and ink style, I guess, had changed over the years, and I wanted to give it another go with the way I worked at that time. So I didn't really change the adaptation very much at all. I kind of kept that, and the panel layouts and everything. I think I changed maybe a couple of the drawings, but otherwise it was pretty much the same, except I wanted to give it a different look. Things like that. They kind of just chew at my brain sometimes. I think if I had another chance, I'd do it differently. So you mentioned that you're at work now on the Blue Dahlia story. That is the next in the Murder Mysteries. Are there any other projects that you can tell us about that you're either working on now or, let's say, in the immediate future?
Yes, absolutely. I've just finished I don't know what to call it. It's a fictional murder mystery, but it's not exactly a comic. It's more like a book in which each page is a full page illustration with a caption on the bottom, and it's going to be up on Kickstarter by the 1st of July. So hopefully I'll get that funded and have it printed this year.
Oh, wow, that's big news.
It's called Murder at the Hollywood Hotel.
So Murder at the Hollywood Hotel, and our listeners can expect to see it going up on Kickstarter in next month, you say, in July?
1st of July is what we're hoping to do, yeah. I have this friend, Mark Rosenbaum, who's kind of been my agent and facilitator for getting my projects up on Kickstarter. And, he and I have been planning this for a while.
Wow, that's great. Can you tell us about any of the incentives, or is it a little too early?
I think he's kind of working on that now, but it'll be similar to the previous projects I've had on Kickstarter, like there'll be original art or having yourself drawn into the story. That's at the higher levels, and or collections of my previous books, things like that. I don't know. We're still in the process of working that out.
Wow, that is exciting.
That is exciting, yeah.
And you know what I think would be at least as, if not more exciting, Rick, is I'm envisioning it. Maybe it's a television series. Maybe it could be a book series. It'd be something like Murder, She Wrote, but it's based on a comics artist who does books on historical murders who becomes an inadvertent detective himself.
I like that idea.
You could be comics Angela Lansbury.
Well, I can think of worse things to be. Yeah. I like that. Yeah, okay. That sounds great.
And if you ever do that, hey, just acknowledge that you got the idea on the Comics Alternative, and that'll be good enough for us.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you would receive ample credit.
Yeah, and give us a blurb on one of your books. These guys like this murder mystery. So.
Okay.
Well, Rick, thank you very much for taking the time again to talk with us on the Comics Alternative, and we definitely look forward to the upcoming projects, especially this new Kickstarter campaign.
Terrific. Yeah, look for it in July. And thank you, Derek and Andy. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Rick. It was a pleasure. Wow, Derek, that was not only was it fun talking to Rick, but he told us some great stuff that's coming up. I can't wait for those projects to come out. And when we do an interview like this, it makes me want to go back and read everything the creator has done before.
Yeah, same here. Now, I did go back and reread some of the earlier books that I'd previously read, but I didn't have time to read everything. It'd be great if I'd had the time to go through and read both of the compendiums again, the Victorian Murder compendiums.
Yeah.
But, great news about the upcoming work on the Blue Dahlia case. But I think even more impressive is this Kickstarter project that he mentioned that should be going live the beginning of June.
Yeah, so look for Murder at the Hollywood Hotel, the Kickstarter project for that. I know I'm going to be checking that out, and I'm definitely going to be contributing to that, so you should too.
Yeah, and if I can remember, I'll put up a note on the blog that has gone up, because it's something that readers should definitely, and listeners to this podcast, should definitely check out. And if you're not familiar with Rick Geary's work, well, if you go to our website, go to the show notes for this episode, you're going to find links to a lot of his works. So get his books, and there are a lot that are still in print, and you'll see what we're talking about. And in fact, if you do want to get in on the Rick Geary bandwagon, not only can you get them through Amazon via our website and our links, but you can also find his books at the sister company of our sponsor. Now, our sponsor is Discount Comic Book Service, but one of their sister companies is In Stock Trade. If you go to InStockTrades.com, you'll find Louise Brooks Detective at 25% off of the cover price. So instead of paying $15.99, you'll only pay $11.99. You can also find both of his Victorian Murder compendiums at 25% off, and those are Volume 1 is at $18.74, and Volume 2 is $22.49. And Andy, he mentioned that his Blanche stories had been collected a few years ago from Dark Horse. In Stock Trades has that as well, and it's at 42% off of the cover price. So instead of paying $15.95, it's only $9.25.
Oh my gosh.
That's incredible. So definitely check out Rick's work. And after you do read his great stories, get in touch with us and let us know that we made a good choice having him back on the show for a second time. You can get in touch with us by going to the website, comicsalternative.com, and you'll see a tab on the right-hand side of your browser that says Send Voicemail. Click it, and from the comfort of your own desktop or mobile device, you can leave us a message from the wonders of SpeakPipe. It's very simple. But if you want to be difficult about things, then you can pick up the phone and call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
And if you want to find out about the latest news, the latest updates to the blog and the podcast, the best way to do that is to join us on Twitter. We are at 2, the number 2, guys with PhDs, and we appreciate all the people who retweet our tweets.
That's right. It's a great way to reach out to us. A lot of you also get in touch with us via email. You can email the show at 2guys, that's TWOGUYS, at comicsalternative.com. You can contact me directly at Derek at comicsalternative.com. And Andy?
You can contact me at Wolverton at comicsalternative.com.
You can also find us on Facebook, on Tumblr, on Instagram, and on Google+. We also have a YouTube channel, but you can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, and when you do, please be sure to give us a rating and review. You can stream us on Stitcher, you can find us also on TuneIn, and you can still get every single one of our episodes, as well as all of our reviews and comics-related commentary that we put up on our blog at the website, comicsalternative.com.
That's right. There's a lot of ways you can find us, and take advantage of all of them.
That's right. We want to hear from you. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy.
We'll see you later.